The Boeing 737 shuddered through turbulence at 37,000 feet, passengers gripping armrests as lightning illuminated the cabin windows. In seat 14C, Captain Zara Phoenix, Blackwood adjusted her worn leather jacket and stared at the storm clouds, her calloused fingers unconsciously tracing the faded wings pinned to her collar. She'd removed her flight suit hours ago at Denver International, trading military precision for civilian anonymity. Just another passenger heading home to Seattle after her discharge hearing. Just another veteran struggling to find purpose in a world that had moved on without her. The commercial pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, professional but tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some weather-related delays. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Phoenix noticed the slight tremor in his voice, the way he clipped his words. 23 years flying everything from Cessnas to F-22 Raptors had taught her to read fear in a pilot's cadence. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the memories that always surfaced during flights. The sound of rotors, the smell of hydraulic fluid mixed with desert sand, the weight of decisions that saved lives and haunted dreams. Her medical discharge papers crinkled in her jacket pocket, severe PTSD, they'd written. Unfit for active duty. The bureaucratic language that reduced 2 decades of service to a checkbox marked damaged goods. A flight attendant hurried past, radio crackling with urgent chatter. Phoenix caught fragments: emergency frequency, military aircraft, escort required. Her pulse quickened. Something was wrong, very wrong. The cabin lights flickered. Passengers murmured nervously as the aircraft banked sharply left, then right, as if the pilot was struggling with the controls. Phoenix unbuckled her seatbelt and moved toward the galley, muscle memory overriding civilian protocol. The lead flight attendant, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, was speaking rapidly into a handheld radio. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "What's the situation?" Phoenix asked quietly, her command presence bleeding through despite her civilian clothes. The attendant hesitated, studying Phoenix's bearing, the confident way she stood despite the aircraft's erratic movement. "Are you military?" Phoenix's jaw tightened. "What's happening?" Before the attendant could respond, the pilot's voice cut through the cabin again, this time dropping all pretense of calm. "This is Captain Rodriguez. We have a problem. I repeat, we have a significant problem. Is there a military pilot on board this aircraft? We need immediate assistance." Phoenix felt every eye in the cabin turn toward her as she stepped forward, 23 years of training crystallizing into a single moment of absolute clarity. The storm outside seemed to pause, waiting for her answer. The cabin fell silent except for the engine's steady drone and the distant rumble of thunder. Phoenix reached for the intercom button, her hands steady despite the chaos brewing around them. She'd spent months being told she wasn't fit to fly, wasn't stable enough for command, wasn't the pilot she used to be. Now, 37,000 feet above the Pacific Northwest, with 237 souls depending on steady hands and sharp instincts, none of that mattered. "This is Captain Blackwood, United States Air Force," she announced, her voice carrying the authority that had once commanded squadrons through hostile airspace. "I'm coming forward." The first-class passengers parted like water as Phoenix moved through the cabin, her stride purposeful despite the aircraft's continued instability. She'd noticed the subtle signs before the pilot's announcement, the way the wings flexed more than normal, the irregular engine harmonics, the slight yaw that suggested hydraulic issues. Her trained eye cataloged every detail while her mind raced through emergency protocols. Captain Rodriguez met her at the cockpit door, his face pale with relief and residual fear. "Thank God. We've lost primary hydraulic systems and backup is failing. I can barely control the aircraft." His hands shook as he gestured toward the instrument panel, a Christmas tree of warning lights and alarms. Phoenix slid into the jump seat behind the pilots, her eyes immediately scanning the displays. Oil pressure dropping on engine 2. Hydraulic fluid levels critical across all systems. Flight control surfaces responding sluggishly to input. She'd seen this configuration before, over the mountains of Afghanistan, when surface-to-air missiles had turned her A-10 Warthog into a flying paperweight held together by prayers and pilot skill. "What's your fuel state?" she asked, already calculating glide ratios and emergency landing options. 43 minutes at current consumption, the co-pilot responded, wiping sweat from his forehead. Phoenix studied the weather radar, noting the storm system stretching from Vancouver to Portland. Seattle-Tacoma International was socked in with severe thunderstorms, visibility near zero. Portland wasn't much better, but there was a gap in the weather pattern, a narrow corridor that might give them a chance. "Contact Seattle Center," she instructed, her voice calm and measured. "Declare an emergency and request vectors to McChord Air Force Base. Tell them we need emergency equipment standing by and a precision approach radar controller." Rodriguez hesitated. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not sure about attempting a military base landing in these conditions." Phoenix's eyes met his in the reflection of the instrument panel. "Captain, I've put aircraft down in worse conditions with half these systems. McChord has the equipment and personnel to handle this situation. Trust me." The words carried weight earned through countless missions where trust meant the difference between coming home and becoming a memorial wall addition. The radio crackled with Seattle Center's response, professional urgency barely masking concern. Military aircraft were already being vectored to provide escort, their radar signatures appearing on the scope like guardian angels in the storm. Outside the cockpit windows, lightning painted the clouds in stark relief, and Phoenix felt the familiar calm that came before battle. She was home. Seattle Center's voice filled the cockpit with practiced efficiency. "United 847, emergency services are rolling at McChord. Weather is marginal VFR with gusting crosswinds to 30 knots. Advise your approach intentions." Phoenix took the microphone, her call sign rolling off her tongue like muscle memory. "Seattle Center, this is Phoenix. I'll be conducting the approach. Request tactical frequency for military escort coordination." There was a pause before the controller responded, and Phoenix could imagine the brief conference in the radar facility as they processed her call sign. Phoenix, the pilot who'd brought home 17 damaged aircraft during her combat tour, the one who'd never lost a wingman, the one whose flying had become legend in ready rooms across 3 continents. "Phoenix, understand you're taking over. Switching to tactical frequency 255.4. Good luck." The radio frequency change brought the crisp voices of F-15 Eagle pilots, their twin-engine fighters cutting through the storm like silver bullets. "Phoenix, this is Viper Flight, 2 Eagles at your 6 o'clock high. We've got you on radar." "Viper Flight, Phoenix. Good to hear friendly voices. What's your visual on the weather deck?" "Ceiling is variable, 300 to broken 800. Rain's coming down in sheets, but there's a sucker hole developing northeast of McChord. Winds are ugly but workable." Phoenix nodded to Rodriguez. "Take us down to 8,000 feet. I need to feel how she responds at approach speeds." As the 737 descended, she watched the control surfaces carefully, noting the delayed response and the way the aircraft wanted to roll left. The hydraulic issues were worsening, but they still had options. Through the storm, McChord Air Force Base appeared like a beacon. Emergency vehicles lined the runway, their red and blue lights cutting through the rain. The control tower had been cleared except for essential personnel, and Phoenix could see the crash recovery team standing ready. It had been 8 months since her last military landing, but the sight of those runway lights awakened something deep in her chest. "United 847, McChord Tower. Runway 34 is yours. Wind 350 at 28 gusting 35. Emergency equipment standing by." Phoenix keyed the microphone. "McChord Tower, Phoenix inbound. rolling final. The words felt like coming home to a place she'd been told she could never return to, with people who understood that sometimes the only way out is through. The approach was a knife's edge between controlled flight and catastrophic failure. Phoenix's hands moved across the instrument panel with surgical precision, compensating for every variation in the aircraft's behavior. The 737 wallowed through the turbulence like a wounded bird, its control surfaces fighting her inputs with each gust of wind. "Airspeed is bleeding off," Rodriguez reported, his knuckles white on the yoke. "I see it." Phoenix's voice remained steady as she made minute adjustments to pitch and power. The aircraft was flying on borrowed time and diminishing hydraulic pressure. Every control input had to be perfect because there might not be opportunity for correction. At 500 feet, they broke through the cloud deck into driving rain. McCord's runway stretched before them, a ribbon of concrete bordered by emergency vehicles whose lights painted the darkness in urgent reds and blues. Phoenix could see firefighters in their silver suits, paramedics standing ready, the crash recovery team with their specialized equipment. "Phoenix, Viper 1, looking good from up here, you've got this." The vote of confidence from her military escort steadied her resolve. These weren't just words of encouragement. They were an acknowledgement from one warrior to another. Recognition that skill transcended paperwork, that flying ability wasn't diminished by medical discharge papers. "Flaps 30, landing checklist complete," the co-pilot announced. Phoenix felt the aircraft settle onto the glide path, every fiber of her being focused on the subtle interplay of wind, weight, and aerodynamics. The runway lights grew larger through the rain-streaked windscreen. At 100 feet, a massive wind shear caught the 737's left wing, rolling the aircraft 30 degrees before Phoenix's reflexes kicked in. "Full right aileron. More power on 2, she commanded, her hands dancing across the controls with practiced expertise. The aircraft shuddered but responded, wings leveling as they crossed the runway threshold. The touchdown was firm but controlled, main gear kissing the concrete with a sound Phoenix had heard thousands of times but never quite like this. They were down, safe, alive. As the 737 rolled to a stop surrounded by emergency vehicles, the cabin erupted in applause. Phoenix sat back in the jump seat, adrenaline slowly ebbing, watching Rodriguez shut down the engines with hands that no longer trembled. "How did you do that?" he asked quietly. Phoenix unbuckled her harness and stood, looking out at the military base that had rejected her medical clearance but welcomed her skill when it mattered most. "Same way you do anything that matters, one decision at a time until you're home." The passenger cabin had transformed from a place of fear into something resembling a celebration. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced calm, helping passengers gather belongings while explaining the evacuation procedures that, thankfully, wouldn't be necessary. Through the windows, Phoenix could see the emergency crews standing down, their equipment returning to ready status rather than active crisis mode. Captain Rodriguez stood and faced her, his expression mixing gratitude with something deeper, professional respect. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to." Phoenix gathered her leather jacket, feeling the weight of her discharge papers in the pocket. Strange how light they seemed now. "You would have done the same thing." As passengers began deplaning through the forward galley, many stopped to shake her hand or offer quiet words of thanks. An elderly man pressed a business card into her palm. "My grandson flies F-16s at Hill Air Force Base. He'll want to know about this." A young mother hugged her briefly. "Thank you for bringing me home to my bobbies." The simple human connections felt more meaningful than any medal ceremony Phoenix had ever attended. These weren't fellow warriors bound by shared service and common cause. These were ordinary people whose lives had intersected with hers at 37,000 feet, and for a few crucial minutes, her skills had meant everything. Outside, the rain was beginning to ease. The storm system that had nearly claimed them was moving inland, its fury spent against the Cascade Mountains. Phoenix walked down the air stairs onto the McCord tarmac, breathing the familiar mixture of jet fuel and rain that defined military aviation. Colonel Marcus Webb, the base commander, waited at the bottom of the stairs. Phoenix recognized him immediately. They'd served together at Bagram Air Base, where his C-17s had supported her ground attack missions. His presence here wasn't coincidence. "Zara," he said simply, using her first name rather than rank or call sign. "Hell of a piece of flying." Phoenix nodded, unsure how to respond. 8 months ago, this same man had signed the paperwork supporting her medical discharge. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "Walk with me," Webb said, and together they moved away from the aircraft toward the terminal building. Behind them, maintenance crews were already beginning their inspection of the damaged 737, but Phoenix's focus had shifted to the conversation she sensed was coming. In the base operations center, Webb poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured toward a quiet corner away from the duty officers monitoring radio traffic. The familiar sounds of military aviation surrounded them, the distant whine of jet engines, radio chatter from the control tower, the measured cadence of professionals doing their jobs. "I've been watching the news about veteran suicide rates," Webb said without preamble, reading the reports about PTSD and pilot shortages, thinking about talented people we've pushed out because they didn't fit neat categories. He sipped his coffee, studying Phoenix over the rim. What happened up there tonight? That wasn't someone broken by combat stress. That was someone remembering who she really is. Phoenix felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition she hadn't experienced since her discharge hearing. "Marcus, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but—" "I'm not trying to do anything except acknowledge what I witnessed," Webb interrupted gently. 237 people are alive tonight because you were in seat 14C, not because of your medical file or your discharge status, because of who you are when it matters most. Outside the windows, she could see the F-15 Eagles that had escorted them safely home, their sleek forms resting in their hardened shelters. For 8 months, Phoenix had felt like an exile from the world that had defined her adult life. Tonight, surrounded by the sights and sounds of military aviation, that exile felt less permanent. "The Air National Guard has openings for experienced pilots," Webb continued. "Part-time service, different mission parameters, less deployment tempo." He slid a folder across the table. "Just something to consider." Phoenix picked up the folder but didn't open it. Inside would be application forms, medical review procedures, a pathway back to the cockpit she thought she'd lost forever. The weight of possibility felt heavier than her discharge papers had ever been. Through the operations center windows, she watched ground crews preparing an F-16 for an early morning training flight. The young pilot conducting his pre-flight inspection moved with the same careful precision Phoenix remembered from her own early days, when flying was more prayer than science, and every flight felt like a small miracle. The base chaplain arrived as Phoenix was finishing her second cup of coffee, his collar barely visible beneath his flight jacket. Chaplain Rodriguez, no relation to the airline captain, had been at McCord for 5 years, counseling airmen through deployments, family crises, and the particular stresses that came with military aviation. "Colonel Webb thought you might want to talk," he said simply, taking a seat without invitation. "About tonight or anything else." Phoenix studied his face, nodding the laugh lines around his eyes and the comfortable way he wore his authority. She'd never been particularly religious, but combat had taught her to recognize genuine compassion when she encountered it. "I've been wondering," she said slowly, "whether tonight was about redemption or just muscle memory." "Does it matter?" Rodriguez asked. "You saved lives. You demonstrated skills that 8 months of paperwork said you'd lost. You reminded everyone in that aircraft that competence doesn't expire just because bureaucracy says it does. Through the windows, dawn was beginning to touch the eastern mountains, painting the sky in soft grays and golds. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind the crystal-clear air that made the Pacific Northwest one of the most beautiful places to fly in the world. I keep thinking about the passengers, Phoenix continued, how they looked at me after we landed, not like someone damaged or broken, but like someone who'd done something meaningful. Maybe that's because you had, the chaplain said. Maybe the real question isn't whether you're fit for service, but whether service is still meaningful to you. Phoenix opened the folder Webb had given her, scanning the application materials for Air National Guard pilot positions. The forms were familiar medical history, flight experience, references, but the tone was different. These weren't documents designed to exclude people, but to find ways to include them. The Guard flies search and rescue missions, Rodriguez noted, reading over her shoulder. Disaster relief, homeland security, different from combat but still about bringing people home safely. Phoenix thought about the elderly man who'd pressed his grandson's business card into her hand, about the young mother grateful to return to her children, about Captain Rodriguez, whose hands had finally stopped shaking. Different missions, same core purpose, using specialized skills to serve others when they needed it most. She picked up a pen and began filling out the first form. The medical review process took 6 weeks, during which Phoenix found herself living in an odd sort of limbo. She'd moved back to her childhood home in Tacoma, helping her parents with their small marina while waiting for the Air National Guard's decision. The work was honest and physical, maintaining boat engines, organizing dock space, dealing with weekend sailors who thought they knew more about navigation than they actually did. Her father, a retired Navy chief petty officer, watched her tinker with a stubborn outboard motor one gray October morning. "You're different since the landing," he observed, handing her a socket wrench. "How so?" "More like yourself, less like someone pretending to be fine." Phoenix paused in her work, considering his words. The constant tension she'd carried since her discharge had indeed begun to ease. The nightmares still came, but less frequently. The hypervigilance that had made civilian life feel like wearing clothes that didn't fit was becoming more manageable. Her phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Webb, "Medical review complete. Call when you have a few minutes." Phoenix excused herself from the marina and walked to the end of the longest dock, where the sound of lapping water wouldn't interfere with the call. Webb's voice was professionally neutral when he answered, giving nothing away. "The flight surgeon has reviewed your case," he began without preamble, "along with the incident report from United 847 and statements from the crew. The medical board has determined that your PTSD diagnosis, while valid, doesn't preclude part-time flight duties in non-combat roles." Phoenix closed her eyes, feeling something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. "There are conditions," Webb continued. "Regular counseling sessions, restricted duty initially, probationary period. But if you're interested, the 141st Air Refueling Wing has an opening for a KC-135 pilot. Not quite the same as flying fighters, but it's still flying. Tanker duty, aerial refueling. The quiet, technical flying that kept other aircraft airborne and missions possible. Phoenix had always respected tanker pilots, even if their work lacked the glamour of air-to-air combat or ground attack missions. It was flying that required precision, patience, and the kind of steady nerves that came with experience. "When do I start?" she asked. "Next month. Welcome back, Phoenix." That evening, Phoenix drove to McCord Air Force Base for the first time since the emergency landing. The guards at the gate checked her temporary access pass and waved her through with professional courtesy. She parked near the flight line and walked toward the hangars where the KC-135 Stratotankers were maintained. The aircraft were massive compared to the fighters she'd flown in combat, four-engine, Boeing 707 derivatives, designed for the unglamorous but essential work of keeping other aircraft fueled during long-range missions. Their gray paint schemes and utilitarian design spoke of function over form, reliability over speed. Technical Sergeant Maria Santos found her starring up at the tanker's refueling boom, the articulated arm that would extend during aerial refueling operations to connect with receiver aircraft. Santos was the boom operator on the crew Phoenix would be joining, a 20-year veteran whose expertise with the refueling systems was legendary throughout the wing. "First time seeing one up close?" Santos asked. "First time thinking about flying one," Phoenix admitted. "It's bigger than I expected." Santos laughed. "They're gentle giants, not as responsive as fighters, but they'll get you where you need to go and bring you home safely. Plus, our missions tend to be more predictable than what you're used to." They walked around the aircraft together, Santos pointing out the modifications that distinguished tankers from standard passenger aircraft. The refueling pods under the wings, the strengthened floor for carrying additional fuel loads, the boom operator's position in the tail, with its panoramic windows for monitoring refueling operations. "What's the mission schedule like?" Phoenix asked. "Training flights twice a week, exercises with active duty units maybe once a month, deployment rotations every few years, but nothing like the tempo you maintained in combat." Santos paused at the aircraft's nose, where the 141st Squadron emblem was painted. "It's good work, important work, just different." Phoenix studied the emblem, a stylized eagle carrying an olive branch, symbolizing the wing's dual mission of strength and peace. Different indeed from the aggressive hawks and wolves that had decorated her fighter aircraft. This was flying in service of others rather than flying to destroy enemies. "The crew chief wants to meet you," Santos continued, leading Phoenix toward a nearby hangar where several aircraft were undergoing scheduled maintenance. Master Sergeant David Kim had been maintaining KC-135s longer than Phoenix had been flying. His knowledge of the aircraft's systems was encyclopedic, and his standards for maintenance were legendary throughout the Air National Guard. Pilots trusted Kim because his attention to detail meant aircraft came back from missions, and crews trusted him because he never signed off on anything he wouldn't fly in himself. "So you're the pilot from the United Flight," Kim said without preamble as they approached his workstation. "Read the incident report. Hell of a piece of flying." Phoenix nodded her thanks but found herself more interested in the maintenance logs Kim was updating. Every component, every inspection, every minor discrepancy was documented with meticulous care. This was the unglamorous foundation that made military aviation possible, thousands of small decisions by dedicated professionals who took pride in keeping aircraft airworthy. "These birds are reliable," Kim continued, "but they're not forgiving if you don't treat them with respect. They'll teach you patience if you don't have it, and they'll reward you with long service if you do." As they talked, Phoenix realized she was looking forward to learning the KC-135 systems, to mastering the subtle art of aerial refueling, to being part of a crew focused on enabling other people's missions, rather than conducting her own. After years of single-seat fighters where every decision was hers alone, the prospect of shared responsibility felt like a gift rather than a limitation. The training pipeline would take 4 months, ground school, simulator time, supervised flights, and finally certification as aircraft commander. It wasn't the accelerated combat training she remembered from her early career, but careful, methodical preparation for a different kind of flying. Flying that measured success in fuel transferred rather than targets destroyed, in safe arrivals rather than enemy defeats. Walking back to her car as the sun set behind the Olympic Mountains, Phoenix felt something she hadn't experienced since her discharge: anticipation for tomorrow. Not just hope that things might improve, but genuine excitement about challenges ahead and work that mattered. The storm that had brought her back to McCord 8 weeks ago felt like a lifetime past, but its lessons remained clear. Sometimes the only way home is through the worst weather you can imagine, trusting your instruments and your training when everything else fails. The KC-135's engine spooled up with the characteristic whine Phoenix remembered from her fighter days, but the sound was deeper now, more sustained. 4 Pratt & Whitney turbofans instead of the twin afterburning monsters that had powered her F-22 Raptor. Different aircraft, different mission, but the fundamental thrill of aviation remained unchanged as the Stratotanker rolled down McCord's runway for her first official mission as an Air National Guard pilot. Phoenix, this is Seattle Center. You're cleared direct to Bravo 23, maintain flight level 270. Contact Yellowstone approach on 134.7. Seattle Center, Phoenix flight. Direct Bravo 23 270, good day. 6 months of training had transformed Phoenix from fighter pilot to tanker aircraft commander, but the radio discipline remained as crisp as ever. In the right seat, Major Jennifer Walsh served as co-pilot and instructor pilot, ready to intervene if necessary but content to let Phoenix handle the routine flight operations. Behind them, Technical Sergeant Santos managed the boom operator's station, preparing for the aerial refueling exercise that would define today's mission. The receiver aircraft were already airborne, 2 F-15 Eagles from the 142nd Fighter Wing, conducting long-range navigation training that would require fuel top-offs to complete their planned route. It was exactly the kind of mission Phoenix had flown countless times from the receiving end, but her perspective had shifted dramatically from the tanker's cockpit. Contacts bearing 270, 30 miles, Santos reported from her position in the tail. 2 Eagles in formation, right on schedule. Phoenix adjusted course slightly, lining up for the rendezvous with the precision that had become second nature over months of training. The KC-135 flew differently than any aircraft she'd previously commanded, less responsive but more stable, designed for the steady flight paths required during fuel transfer operations. Viper 11 Phoenix, contact established, ready for pre-contact checks. Phoenix Viper 11, 2 Eagles fuel state 6.5 each, ready for service. The familiar dance began as the F-15 slid into position behind the tanker, their pilots making minute adjustments to stay within the narrow parameters required for safe refueling. Phoenix had performed this maneuver hundreds of times as a receiver, but watching it unfold from the tanker's perspective revealed complexities she'd never fully appreciated. Santos extended the refueling boom with practiced expertise, the articulated arm reaching toward the lead Eagle's receptacle. Viper 11, you're cleared in. Come forward and hold. The connection was smooth, years of training evident in both crews' performance. Fuel flowed from the KC-135's tanks into the Eagle's internal systems, extending the fighter's range and mission capability. It was unglamorous work compared to air-to-air combat, but Phoenix found deep satisfaction in the precision required and the knowledge that her skills were enabling someone else's mission success. Good contact, Viper 11, taking fuel. Phoenix copies, fuel flowing normally. 20 minutes later, both Eagles had topped off their tanks and departed for the second leg of their training mission. Phoenix watched them disappear into the distance, their silver forms becoming dots against the blue sky before vanishing entirely. Mission accomplished through teamwork, technical competence, and the kind of quiet professionalism that defined military aviation at its best. Nice work, Walsh commented as they began the return flight to McCord. Smooth as silk, you're ready for solo aircraft commander duties. Phoenix nodded, feeling the satisfaction that came with mastering new skills and contributing to something larger than herself. The mission had been routine, but routine missions were the backbone of military readiness. Every successful refueling meant aircraft could extend their operational range, stay airborne longer, accomplish objectives that would otherwise be impossible. "How does it feel?" Walsh asked. "Different from fighters." "Different," Phoenix agreed, "but important. Maybe more important than I realized when I was on the receiving end." As McCord Air Force Base appeared on the horizon, Phoenix reflected on the journey that had brought her back to military aviation. The emergency landing that had demonstrated her skills hadn't been diminished by PTSD. The medical review process that had found ways to include rather than exclude. The training pipeline that had taught her new applications for old skills. The crew members who had accepted her not as a damaged veteran, but as a professional pilot contributing to shared missions. The KC-135's main gear touched down on McCord's runway with the solid thump Phoenix had learned to appreciate during her conversion training. Different from the precise touchdowns she'd practiced in fighters, but appropriate for an aircraft designed for reliability rather than performance. As they taxied toward the parking ramp, Phoenix felt the deep satisfaction that came with completing another successful mission. Ground crews were waiting to service the aircraft, their practiced efficiency turning around the KC-135 for its next scheduled flight. Phoenix completed the post-flight checklist with Walsh, documenting the mission details that would become part of the squadron's official records. Routine paperwork, but paperwork that certified another successful contribution to military readiness. "Same time next week," Walsh asked as they gathered their flight gear. "Wouldn't miss it," Phoenix replied and meant it completely. That evening, Phoenix drove to her parents' marina as she had every day since returning to civilian life. But now the routine felt different, less like marking time, and more like maintaining connections to the community that had shaped her. Her father was closing up the marina office, tallying the day's receipts and preparing deposit slips. "Good flight?" he asked, the question that had replaced "good day at the office" in their family vocabulary. "Good flight," Phoenix confirmed. "Refueled some Eagles, brought everyone home safe." Her father nodded with the understanding that came from his own military service. Different branch, different era, but the same fundamental satisfaction in work well done and missions accomplished. "Your mother's making dinner. Something about celebrating your official aircraft commander certification." The small celebration felt right, family acknowledging achievement, community recognizing contribution, personal milestones marked with appropriate ceremony. Phoenix had missed this sense of belonging during the months between her discharge and her return to flying. The feeling that her skills mattered, that her service contributed to something important, that she had found her place in the world again. Later that evening, as Phoenix walked along the marina's longest dock, she thought about the passengers from United 847, 237 people who had continued with their lives after that stormy night, most probably unaware that their emergency landing had triggered a chain of events leading to this moment. Their need had called forth skills she'd thought were lost forever. Their trust had reminded her that competence transcends paperwork, that value isn't diminished by medical diagnoses or discharge orders. Her phone buzzed with a text from Technical Sergeant Santos. "Great flying today, AC. Looking forward to next week's mission." AC, Aircraft Commander. The simple abbreviation carried weight earned through months of training and demonstrated competence. Not a courtesy title or participation trophy, but recognition of proven ability to lead crews and accomplish missions safely and effectively. Phoenix typed back, "Thanks for the smooth boom work, same here." Professional acknowledgement between crew members, the foundation of military aviation success. Individual skills contributing to collective capability, personal excellence serving shared purposes. It wasn't the adrenaline rush of air-to-air combat or the immediate gratification of ground attack missions, but it was deeply satisfying work that utilized her abilities in service of others. Tomorrow would bring another training flight, another opportunity to refine skills and contribute to squadron readiness. Next month would bring a longer deployment, supporting active duty operations that required extended range capabilities only aerial refueling could provide. Different challenges, same core mission, using specialized skills when and where they were needed most. Phoenix looked up at the clear night sky, where stars were beginning to appear above Puget Sound. Somewhere up there, military aircraft were conducting training missions, operational flights, deterrent patrols that required the support services only tanker crews could provide. Her crew, her aircraft, her skills were part of that larger mission now. The journey from Seat 14C to aircraft commander had taken less than a year, but it felt like a lifetime of growth and rediscovery. Sometimes the path home leads through storms that seem insurmountable, requiring navigation by instruments when visibility drops to zero. But with steady hands, reliable training, and the trust of fellow professionals, even the worst weather eventually breaks, revealing clear skies ahead. Phoenix walked back toward her car, keys jingling in her jacket pocket alongside the military ID card that had been returned to her 6 months ago. Tomorrow would bring another flight, another mission, another opportunity to demonstrate that healing doesn't mean forgetting how to be excellent when excellence matters most. Above her, a formation of F-15s transited overhead, their navigation lights blinking in the darkness as they returned from a training mission. Probably the same Eagles she'd refueled that afternoon, now safely home because someone had been there to extend their range when they needed it. Mission accomplished, until tomorrow when it would begin again.